find such a love at our age. Whoever thought we could dance on a thrilling...
Welcome to Couples Therapy in 7 Words. I'm your co-host, Judy Alexander, and I'm here with my husband, Dr. Bruce Chalmers.
Hello, Judy. Hello, viewers and listeners. Judy, what's today's title?
Solutions for ADHD Couples, an interview with Lisa Rabinowitz.
We just finished that interview, and you will get a chance to see it very shortly. If you want to learn all about working with ADHD and other kinds of neurodiverse couples, and by couples, could be one person has the sort of neurodiverse diagnosis,
right,
or both. And
right.
Anyway, that's Lisa's bailiwick, and she talks all about it, and she's written a book about it, and you will get to hear that very shortly. And in fact, all I want to say is buy our books. We've got a bunch of really cool books out there.
Yes, we do. We talk about one of yours. It's not about communication, because that's what Lisa's also one of her shticks is, about communication, and
that's right.
And it's not about communication too.
And I do want to put in a plug for something I'm going to put in the episode notes.
Okay.
I'm working on a new book. I haven't as yet to be titled, and it's going to be a workbook to help people make better relationships and fix what's wrong. And in association with that, I've developed an assessment tool, which is sort of in beta test, as I'm putting it, because it's still open to being changed. And I'm going to put the link for that in the notes for this episode. And I invite anybody, please go to that, try it out. It will not collect your email. I won't know who you are. I'll get your results, but I won't get any identifying information, whatever. You'll be able to see, and I'll be curious, any comments you have, and it does ask you for comments, after you've done it. Any comments you have will be really helpful for me. So I really want to invite you. Please do that. It doesn't take long to do. You did it. How long did it take? It was like 5 minutes.
5 minutes or
yeah,
something.
it's very quick. And the people who have done it, and numbers of people have done it, and they have been telling me it has been very thought-provoking and often helpful and occasionally disturbing. but anyway, just even when it's been disturbing, it's often been helpful. So please do that. So let's go to our interview, and we'll see you on the other side.
Our guest today is Lisa Rabinowitz. Lisa is a licensed therapist, couple specialist, and ADHD relationship expert. She's certified in both the Gottman method and the psychobiological approach to couple therapy, and she specializes in working with neurodiverse couples, especially those navigating the unique challenges ADHD brings to relationships. She's also the author of Why Won't You Stop Interrupting Me? Simple Solutions for ADHD Couples. Lisa, welcome to Couples Therapy in 7 Words.
Oh, thank you so much, Judy and Bruce, for having me here today. It's my pleasure. My pleasure.
Well, great. Well, we're
Great
delighted
work.
to have you. So we always like to start off by asking our guests, how did you get into the work you do? Tell us something about your own journey.
Sure. So I actually was a trauma therapist for many years and doing a lot of domestic violence work.
Mm.
And at some point, I just thought, can I just get couples a little bit earlier in this whole process and start working on things to maybe not get to this place? Now, sometimes I do have couples calling me, and that is the situation, but I would certainly prefer to get couples who are wanting to work on their communication and want to work on things like how do we manage conflict before we get to that place. So when I took a little break, and when I came back into the field, I said, you know what? I want to do couples. And all my colleagues were like, don't do couples. And I said, don't
I've
worry.
heard that one too, actually. Yeah.
Don't worry. I'm doing Gottman certified. That's going to be my focus. And I'm going to get really trained, because so often, there's some challenges around training. And so I started that, and I said, I love it. And then I thought, let me get some more training. And I just kept on going. So yeah, that's how I got into it.
Well, so you talk about, I'm looking at my notes here that we got from your information, and I was really grabbed by this one. You've talked about the biggest misconception couples have about communication. I'll tell you why I was specifically grabbed by that. It's an interesting question, of course, but I was especially grabbed by it because not my most recent book, but the book before that was called, a rather snarky title, It's Not About Communication, Why Everything You Know About Couples Therapy is Wrong. I just love that it's a snarky title. And I do point out, by the way, in that book, that subtitle, everything you know about couples therapy is wrong, applies to me too. Everything I know about couples therapy is wrong too. So I've written this whole book that's not about communication. I would love to hear how, in fact, first of all, that it probably is about communication. I love it when people, differ with me on that, or you may not even. I'm just curious, what is the biggest misconception that couples have about communication?
Right. So I love your book title. That is an excellent title. What I find is couples come in and what do they say? We want to work on communication.
Right.
That's how I started my book, almost
Oh,
verbatim.
okay, there we go. Right. So,
Yeah.
and I'm not going to differ with them and say, well, maybe and maybe not. So
Uh-huh.
I really try to just be present with them where they're at. And if we want to talk about communication, let's begin the conversation. But and I apologize. I do not know what you wrote in your book, so I
You
apologize for
haven't
that.
memorized my
I
book?
want to hear
Yeah,
your take.
Yes, we definitely want to hear your take, even
yeah,
if it's different from mine. In
yeah,
fact, especially if it's different from
yeah.
mine. Yeah.
So what I find is as I'm working with couples, yes, it's communication. Yes, it's around listening and understanding, but there's so many other pieces. Are we slowing down? I call it the ping pong. We're just like responding and not doing any kind of like understanding, bringing compassion, bringing curiosity, bringing yeah, we'll just say those things to the conversation. Um, and without those things, there's just going to be miscommunication because
Mhm.
I'm going to lead with assumptions and I'm going to know what you're going to say, right? Which is not always true. Uh, and then I'm going to bring all sorts of, I discuss them as like filters and, my dark glasses and my stories. And that then it becomes from a little snowball to a huge avalanche and the conversation just gets lost.
Mhm.
So I want couples to understand, like, okay, there might be something about communication that you want to discuss and talk about, but there could be other things. So I start trying to open up other conversations around whether it's attachment, which was the very long psychobiological approach to couples therapy, which is a mouthful. We call it PACT. But can we talk about attachment? Now, some people don't want to talk about their past. Okay, again, I try to meet them where they're at. If they don't want to discuss that, that's fine. But I definitely think there's some kind of influence from their childhood and how they were raised and what they then expect to see in marriage. Right? I've had couples say, "We're not supposed to fight."
Mm,
Well,
Mm.
yeah.
and I get curious, where did that idea come from?
Mhm.
Well, I never saw my parents fight. Right. So, and then we get into, well, so what does that mean for you? And how does that impact you? And then, of course, it goes to, well, then something's wrong with our relationship because we do
Mhm.
fight.
Mhm.
Um, so I think there can be a lot of misconceptions around that. And at least for myself, I point to a lot of different areas for couples and what shows up for one couple, like assumptions and anticipation might be for one couple, and it could be the stories for another couple,
Mhm.
and it could be trauma for another couple, and it can be,
Mhm.
right? So we start there because that's usually where they're comfortable, but then we
Mhm.
start to pivot into some other areas.
Yeah. It's so interesting that one of the things you said there really grabbed me, which is the part about they come in with assumptions, of course. They don't even know they're making the assumptions. And
Mhm.
that subtitle of mine, Why Everything You Know About Couples Therapy is Wrong, it's really about the knowing. People come in, like you said, already knowing what the other person's going to say, already knowing what they're thinking. Of course, they're usually wrong about that, but they don't know that. And
Yeah.
it's fascinating when people actually realize, my shtick about it's not communication is simply recognizing that they're probably very effectively communicating. The problem is what they're communicating. That's when, and of course, a lot of the Gottman stuff would be about that.
Yeah.
If they're
Yeah.
communicating things like contempt, one of his four
Oh,
horsemen,
oh yes.
they're in trouble. And they
Mm.
often are
Wow.
very effectively communicating that. The problem isn't that they're not good at communicating. The problem is that what they're communicating.
What they're communicating, right?
They're
Right.
also projecting their own problems onto the other person. Don't you find that?
Oh yeah, it's your fault,
Yeah.
one issue, or it was, of course, I'll always change the story, but one couple that they felt really angry about a situation, and they kept saying, well, you look really angry. You seem really angry, right? Projecting it onto the other person. And I said, oh, slow that down. Let's talk about, could you be angry about something there? Right. And so that frequently is happens. So yeah, we've got that piece. And I would say that there's also some other things around Gottman, the Four Horsemen, but also with Pact, what I love is that he actually describes it as fun house mirrors. That like,
Mm.
this is what I remember, and I'm right. This is the story. Oh, no, 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 that didn't happen. This is what happened, and I'm right. And
Uh,
how we get stuck on our memories and perception, and who knows?
and how did you get into working with neurodiverse couples?
That's a very interesting question. So what happened was the following. I realized after I did Gottman's, 5 years, it took me 5 years to get certified, lots and lots of training, lots of supervision, and it was great. But I felt like I was missing something in the office and I couldn't exactly figure it out. And so I started doing some other trainings and I happened to go to a packed level 1 training. I got home at 5 o'clock in the morning that from the trip, and got home
Wow.
5 o'clock, you know, super, super long day. Yeah. And 9 o'clock in the morning, I had a client. And I
Mm.
and I thought to myself, we had talked a lot about brain and the brain development and different things that might impact the couple regarding the brain. And I thought, I think there's something I'm missing with this couple. And I said, hey guys, do you mind if we do something different today? They're like, sure, Lisa, whatever you want. By the end of the hour, they said, whatever you learned, whatever you just did over that weekend, keep doing it. And I
Mm.
said, excellent, excellent. It wasn't, PACT is so beautiful because it's not just about skills, but it's really experiential. It's really practical. It's really like in the moment, let's like put yourselves back there and what happens and what comes up and were you turned around when you said that to your partner that you didn't notice that they were crying behind you, right?
Mm.
And you just kept talking about the thing that was bothering you and it was just so amazing that I realized there's things I'm missing with clients and the communication, one of them being communication and how neurodiverse couples communicate, which I believe is very different than a neurotypical couple.
Yeah, I mentioned that, by the way, in early in my book about communication. I'm saying there are some exceptions where, especially involving neurodiverse folks, where, like, for example, yeah, they don't use the term Asperger's anymore, but when they did, if
Yeah,
somebody gets that diagnosis, it often means, as you know, it often means they're not good at understanding the emotions of the other person. Well, that's a communications problem.
right.
That is about communication. They need to learn some skills, and the person working
Yeah.
with them needs to learn some skills.
Um,
But yeah, it's interesting. So yeah, neurodiverse. You were noting, yeah,
yeah,
neurodiverse people. It's different. They communicate differently.
very different. And it started becoming more clear after I got more and more training with PACT. And that's really where I started seeing it in different clients that I was working with and just noting like, this one thinks they're so clear when they're expressing something, but it's, I describe it like, does it feel like it's really clear up here? And then when you start saying it, it becomes just like a garbled, story, and you're over here and you're over here and you're over here. And they're like, yeah, how'd you know? I'm like, well, it sounds like that from the conversation. And your partner's like, yeah, yeah, how did you know that that's exactly how I'm feeling? Like, I don't know what you're talking about. You talked about 10 different things in one sentence. Um, and so it became such a great opening for me to start slowing down and noticing the differences between the neurotypical and neurodiverse couples. And I was really became fascinated with it.
And how did you move from that to ADHD, or are you still doing both?
Well, the I will say that I see mostly ADHD couples. Uh,
Hmm.
I would say maybe like 80% are ADHD. Now, I know there's some question on diagnosis and late diagnosis, and we
Of
can talk a
course.
lot about that. The New
Yep.
York Times article. And,
We did a podcast about that article. Yeah.
I know. That's what
You
made me
saw
reach
that.
out. Yeah, that's what made me reach out. I said,
Yeah.
I know that article. I have to reach out to you guys and say, like, yeah, let's talk about that. It's so
Yeah,
interesting.
so let's talk about that.
Yeah.
Yeah. That was a really interesting article. People had very mixed feelings about the findings, and I definitely heard your feelings about it. And
Yeah.
it definitely echoes a lot of the challenges that's happening in the field and with lay people and
Hmm.
our clients, and just being confused and lost and feeling like you are the professional. You're supposed to know what you're doing. You're supposed to have the answers, and a lot of times coming going, I don't know, they're telling me this, they're telling me that.
Hmm.
Medication doesn't work, medication does work. I'm 20 and I needed this, and now I'm 50 and I need that. And, it can be very, very challenging for clients.
So how does it affect relationships if one or even both have
Yeah,
ADHD?
sensitivity.
You
Yeah.
know, what are the challenges that you see and how does it manifest itself?
Right. So definitely, if we go back to communication, I actually had in my book 15 different ways that it impacts the neurodiverse partner. And
Mm.
then I came up with eight for the neurotypical partner, though I do have many couples who both have been diagnosed with neurodiversity, and it can be on the spectrum from ADHD to, whatever we want to call it nowadays.
PDD-NOS,
Yeah.
pervasive developmental disorder not otherwise specified,
All
which
right. All right.
which is
There's
a
a
talk about a mouthful.
mouthful. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And all the different things of, you know, is there characteristics of PDA with his pathological demand avoidance? Is there rejection sensitivity dysphoria? I mean, it can be really confusing for partners and to understand what are all these terms and what does it mean and how does it again affect the couple. So again, I always try to individualize it. I don't try to like, okay, this is definitely what you're, seeing in the relationship. I always say, okay, let's just notice, and again, just wonder and definitely leave judgment aside, right?
Hmm.
People are going to show up, and let's just see if we can understand what's happening. So, you know, every time I could say the smallest little, you know, um, no to something where the partner takes it as, you are telling me you want to leave the relationship.
Mm. Yeah.
That sense of rejection and abandonment and fear, and it's, you know, in Gottman's terms, talking about bids, that you're supposed to be able to, like, if you ask, like, hey, do you want to do dinner at 6? And you go, no, right? That's not a bid, that's a turn away from the partner. So it's supposed to
Hmm.
be a turn towards. So like, hey, well, not 6 doesn't work, but how about 7? But
Hmm.
even that, for a partner who has neurodiversity, ADHD specifically, that can still feel like you don't love me, you don't care about me, I'm not important. And that just stops the conversation or makes it explode, either one. Right. So we have the communication, and again, there's so many different ways that it can play out. We have um, the we'll call it the logistics of the house.
Ah,
And
yes. I
um,
hear about that one actually a fair
yes,
amount.
I am sure you do, right?
Yeah.
And how do we run things, and how do we organize things, and do we remember things, and did we pay that bill? And again, I'm sure you see plenty of couples coming in fighting about, he said he was going to pay the bills, and every month for the last year it's been late. And she said she was going to do the dishes, and every night she forgets, and on
Mm,
and on and on. Right? And
Yeah.
what do you do, and how do you talk about it, and how do you figure it out, and how do you stop blaming each other? Right?
Mhm.
And
mhm.
make it as we have this issue and we need to figure this out. And I really push them towards more of a secure functioning rather than a blame game.
Yeah.
Uh, and
It's interesting. Just the fact that you were saying earlier, whatever the diagnoses are, you start by asking the people what's their actual experience. Because, and we may have said this, I don't know if it came through in the podcast. I think I referred to that podcast as a rant. I
yeah,
let myself rant a little bit, but
yeah,
it's not like I think diagnoses are bad. I don't. They can
no,
be like anything, they can be helpful and they can also be a straitjacket. They can
Yeah.
be either one. And
Right.
so I've worked with so many people over the years who have gotten a diagnosis of ADHD, especially, and said, "Oh my God, this has opened my eyes." And it's given them this liberation. It's like, "Oh, I'm not crazy.
Right.
This is a pattern that lots of people have. It even has a label." The thing that I tend to quibble about is the last D, disorder. It's like,
Yeah.
well, you could call it a disorder, or you could call it a style. I mean, in evolutionary terms, apparently there's good reason for it existing. In
Right.
some contexts, it's
Right.
really adaptive.
Oh, very
But we
much so.
call it a disorder, which is,
Yeah.
that's all right.
Right.
So you're broken, Well,
Yeah.
maybe you're not. Maybe you're just maybe, our culture doesn't equally
Right.
reward all styles.
Right.
That's kind of how it works.
Yes.
But just the fact that you do that, I think it, lets people relax a little bit. And
Mhm.
then the fact that you're recognizing, yeah, there are these characteristic effects. And to have, I think it often, I notice this also, it often, when people go to one of us, a professional type, and
Oh, yeah.
we don't know any better than they do how they should live their lives. I'm very clear about that. But
Yeah.
we just ask questions from a place of respect, and they
Mhm.
can generally say, "Oh, I don't have to be all mad about this. Maybe I can work with it." And then,
Right. Right.
they
Right. Right.
can find a way
Yeah.
through.
Yeah. I wanted to go back when you were talking about, the disorder, right? And
Mm-hmm.
when we put kids in boxes, right? And then
Mm-hmm.
they feel like that straitjacket. And look, we need a school system. We need, a way to educate our children. But
Mm-hmm.
certainly that only sets up many neurodiverse students to have difficulty, right? Many of
Yeah,
them cannot sit in a seat. Many of them cannot, do a lot of the things that are normal things to do in the classroom, right? And so now we have that child grow up to feel like, what's wrong with me? You know,
Mm.
I, bringing the idea of crazy, what's wrong with me? I'm bad, I'm broken, all of those things. And now make your, 20, 30, 50, and then it's everywhere. It's in relationships, I'm seeing that and feeling that. At work, I'm feeling that and seeing that. Where how many entrepreneurs and tremendous
of
creative
course.
ideas that we can get from them, but do we really, you know, cheerlead and focus? Again, there's things we need to focus on. Also, they're challenges, but it seems to be unequally balanced.
Yeah. That's what I was so taken with in that article because they
Mm.
were talking about recognizing, again, it's not all black and white, of course.
Yeah.
Excuse me, but they were talking about recognizing that if you put somebody in a context where their
Mhm.
style is adaptive rather than, they're not being told they're broken, they're being said, "Hey, cool, this works.
Yeah.
Hey, thanks for being who you are. This is great. You're coming up with all these things that those of us whose brains work differently probably wouldn't have come up with.
Mhm.
When that happens, people report they're not broken anymore.
Right.
And so you could say, well, were they ever broken in the first place, or was it really just kind of a mismatch between their environment and who they are? And
100%.
again, none of it's black and white because I
Mhm.
have also such sympathy, especially for parents and teachers
Oh,
who are
yes.
dealing with kids that are so hard to deal with in the context that we put them in.
Oh, yeah. So
And
hard.
and we can't just sort of redesign everything overnight and say, oh, you're
Right.
one of those kids that's hard to parent. All right, let me completely change how we live our lives here.
Right.
And
Right.
it doesn't tend to work very
But
well.
we're dealing with couples now. So how do we deal with the couples where they have that?
Yeah, well, a great question. Yes. So how do you help
Yes.
let's go there actually. In
Yes.
fact, I'll combine it with another question that was one of your list of possible questions. Not only how do you help a couple deal with these things, but also what's different about I'm thinking Manishtana, what is it for our Jewish listeners, they'll know what I'm saying. What makes your approach different from traditional couples therapy?
Right. Right. So I'm going to go to the first question, and that is, um, yeah, I forgot the first question.
How do you help ADHD
Dealing with
couples?
Right.
couples that have
Right.
ADHD when one or
Yeah.
both.
Right. Right. Sorry. Yes. Thank you.
That's
Um,
okay.
so many come in with enough coping skills that with a little bit of extra support that they're able to manage the relationship when I teach them some new skills and teach them like, let's try this, let's try. And like I said, it's very practical. It's very, let's just try this and see if it feels differently, right? Could feel better, might not feel better. Let's give it a try. So I love when I can just do that. But sometimes the deficits and the challenges have never been addressed.
Mm.
The person's having a hard time holding down a job. Person's having a hard time getting out of bed. The person's having a hard time showering. These like very basic things that we think that 30, 40, 50-year-olds should be doing. So now what? So the first thing is I say, I, I, I say this, but I also hate it at the same time. I need you to get ADHD coaching. I work
Mm.
with tons of ADHD coaches. I hate it because I don't want that person to feel like, again, they're labeled as the bad one.
Mhm.
And frequently, one of the things people will say, couples will say to me is, in therapy, we don't feel like either one of us is wrong. It's we
Mhm.
have an issue. What are we going to do? And how are we going to do this differently? So it's much
Yeah.
more of a we situation than a
That's
you're.
great. If they're starting there, they're in relatively good shape because I know plenty of couples where they're not starting there. They are starting in, yeah, I know somebody's wrong and it's you. You know, it's not so much that this is a joint problem. We're both involved. How do we handle it? It's if they're already at that point, they're most of the way there,
Well,
much of
let
the
me
way
rephrase that.
there.
I facilitate that growth
Yes,
and understanding
Ah,
because we don't always
absolutely.
start
Yeah.
there.
walk in the
But
office knowing that from day one.
no. We talk a lot about secure functioning, taking care of each other and the relationship and having each other's back and many other things. So again, back to the coaching piece. So I really will need to put that, you know, to support the relationship if there's just no or none or little coping skills to just do daily living. So if I need to do that, that's what we do. And then that just it's a game changer for couples because how can I work with the couple again because I see it as a system when the person's not doing this and not doing that and not doing the other thing. And then again, it just becomes the focus of you're the one that's broken and you're the one that's bad and you're the one that's wrong. And, you know, that again, I try to keep a play, everybody's here, everybody, we got to show up. So
Yeah.
I find that that's really important. Your second question, which I forgot already. I apologize. I should
What
have written
makes
it down.
your
Different. What makes it
yeah, why
different?
is your approach different? Yeah.
Right. So I think it goes back to what I was just saying, and that is that and that's what couples report to me is that nobody's the problem here. We have an issue. Let's talk about, how we're gonna, manage vacations differently because we're missing the plane and we're fighting in the car and we're, all sorts of things, right? So there's the problem. Let's figure it out. Let's work together. One of the things I love, call it the three P's. I sometimes make it four P's, where we can predict as a couple that there's certain things that are going to happen. For instance, let's just for easy, let's just take the example of vacation, right? That we miss the plane, we, fight in the car. Let's just go with that one. So we can predict those things, right? And then now we're going to plan and prepare. Let's take the first one and now let's start planning and preparing. How can that
Mhm.
go differently? And that's sort of the beginning of the conversation. And then there's some other pieces of that. But when it's we're working on a problem together, it just feels so different for them. And especially for the neurodiverse person who always feels like they're in the wrong.
Mhm.
So that is probably the biggest game changer for couples. I would say one last piece is just they love that they can discuss. Oh, I'm sorry. Let me clarify one other thing. I have the couple looking at each other. I know a lot of couple therapists.
Mm.
I don't know how you work in the office, but we'll have them looking at the therapist. Right? So
Mhm.
they're talking to me, and then you're talking to me, and I say, okay, that is actually what we call you're in the fighting position. You're going to get more likely in fights in the car, on the couch, and things like that. So we're gonna, and then you're talking to me also. So like 2 o'clock on a Friday when you have a problem, like you're not gonna go stare at the screen, right? Or make believe like let's make believe. Here's our therapist. What are we gonna say to her, right? Oh, we want them to be able to sit down. So I actually have them in chairs and I have them having conversations
Mm.
um, in each other. We call it in each other's eyes, right? Hopefully lovingly gazing at each other, not always, sometimes
Mhm.
daggers, but we can attune to each other. We can learn how to really see each other. which frequently we're having a conversation and we're, one's at the sink and one's, in the refrigerator grabbing things. And I'm like, that's not where we're having conversations. Let's sit
Mhm.
down, let's work together. Um, and it just becomes a very, very different conversation. So
Mm.
those are just some of the things that I really try to encourage.
You're reminding me of training I got like 30 years ago.
Yeah.
If you're familiar with narrative therapy, do you know the
Oh
concept?
yeah, I love
Michael
narrative.
White, I mean,
Yeah.
I didn't know him well personally, but I had some trainings with him, and
Mhm.
it was interesting because his big thing was the people aren't the problem is the problem.
Yeah.
You all get
Yeah.
on one side and the problem on the other, and then you work on the problem. Very similar to what you're describing. The other thing that occurred to me when you're talking about people facing each other, because that makes everything you said make sense. There is an alternative to that, which I learned from Tom Anderson. I don't know if he's still around, but he originated this thing in the 1980s called reflective team therapy, and
Oh,
it was a funny origin because it happened because there were all these places in places where they would train therapists where they had one-way mirror rooms, rooms where people could be
sure.
observing.
Oh, oh yeah.
That was based on some work that was done, like the Milan group in the 70s, that was really just awful stuff. But anyway, we can say that now. Anyway, they
Yeah.
had all these
Yeah.
things left over, and they had more or less repudiated the way they were doing it before, and they came up with this way of making use of it, not merely for training, but also for use of the people you're involved with. And the reflecting team approach you can also incorporate even if you don't have a one-way mirror. And oddly enough, it's about having a conversation with each person, the therapist, each person
Yeah.
separately, inviting the other person to simply observe.
Yeah.
And the effect of that is, when it works well, which
Right.
it doesn't always, frankly, but the effect of that is it actually relaxes them. They don't have to feel like they have to be responding. They can just observe. So it has a similar effect to what you're describing, which is also important. Yes,
Yeah.
they need to be able to actually attend to each other.
Right.
But it's sort of coming the opposite approach, having a similar effect in some ways. It's sort of like, yeah, you don't have to respond now. Just notice, just be curious about what you're seeing, and then you turn to the other person. And the other person gets into a reflecting position instead of reactive. They're reflective. So
Right. Right.
that's
Yeah.
another approach too.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I definitely see the tremendous benefit to that because if you're relaxed, right, you can notice a lot more. But if you
Yeah.
feel like you have
Mhm.
to respond next, then it's going to be really hard to notice anything because I'm just thinking, what am I going to say? What am I going to say next?
Oh yeah.
Right? So you lose that
Well,
balance.
yeah, and of course, our 7 words of our 7 word, formula is be kind, don't panic, and have faith. And the reason it's in that order, the be kind, which is, and I'm not just talking about be nice, I'm talking about, kinship, that
Yeah,
sense of attunement to each other. You can't
yeah,
do if you're in a panic.
right.
And the antidote to panic is faith, by which I don't necessarily mean religious faith, but that mindset that would say, wow, this is painful, but it must be meaningful. We know
Mhm.
we're not crazy, evil, or stupid.
Right,
That's
right.
a statement of faith. So
Yeah,
if so, even though we get angry with each other and we're doing
right,
these things which otherwise we wouldn't do, it
right.
must be something meaningful. If we can be curious about it and not in a panic, then
Mhm.
you can start to accept it. Then you can start to say, oh, that's where you're coming from.
Mhm.
And
Mm.
so that phenomenon is all about don't panic.
Right,
And
right.
again, as you're describing, if you can get people into that state where they're feeling respected, heard, and curious, they can
Mhm.
actually open up to each other. And that sounds like very much how you work.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I was gonna say that it's very much how I work, and I was gonna mention one other thing. When I put them in the chairs, it looks like you're in rolling chairs right now. Is that correct?
We are, yes. Although we're actually in my home office. I do all
Oh,
telehealth now. It's
yeah,
all
I do too.
telehealth.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah.
Me too. So I was
Yeah.
gonna say that I actually have them in rolling chairs,
Hmm.
and we can observe all sorts of things, especially the, neurodiversity, right? The moving in the chairs, right? Sometimes, rocking in the chair with
Hmm.
a little bit of
Yeah.
different kind of neurodiversity,
Shuckling. Yeah.
going in the chair, backing away, which, helps me notice the attachment style of the couple. And definitely some research. We need more research on attachment styles around ADHD, which is
Mm.
quite interesting. And then also eye contact, because there's
Uh-huh.
challenges around eye contact. Now, is it a trauma response or is it actually a, ADHD or, autism or ASD or whatever we want to call it nowadays? Um, you know, issue that happens for the couple. Um, it's fascinating to just notice. And a lot of times people will say, I thought you just didn't care, and that's why you looked away. There's that
Yeah.
assumption, back to the assumption.
Hmm.
And
Yep.
it's not that. It's not that. There's challenges around that eye contact. And again,
Mhm.
Yeah.
sometimes it's hard to parse out, is it a trauma response or is it more of neurodiversity response? But we can actually see it happening right in front of
Yeah.
Sometimes
us.
a cultural artifact as
Or
well. Different
cultural.
cultures
Wow.
treat
Wow.
that very differently. Yeah.
Right, right, right. And the seats, right? Like, they some culturally can sit really close. And then
Hmm.
that's way too close comfort, close comfort for me. We're gonna be way out here. Right. And it's always interesting when can you guys roll in a little bit? I can't see you.
Yeah.
Rolling away. So yeah, yeah. So that's great that you do telehealth too. I'm
Yeah.
glad.
Yeah. I was since the pandemic.
I think
Yeah.
most people now
Yeah,
have moved there.
many
Yeah.
certainly have.
Many,
Yeah, yeah.
many.
And I just never went back. We were a few months into it, and I said to Judy, "Wow, not that I was enjoying the pandemic, which I wasn't, but I was really enjoying doing the work that way because just the convenience factor, and something about the way I work. I think because there are other folks I know who are much better than I at noticing things visually. I tend
Mm,
to take in much more through my ears than my eyes. And
mm,
so just because of that, it wasn't as much of a deficit for me as it
oh,
might be for some folks who are much better than I at noticing stuff,
yeah,
visually noticing stuff.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
So it and of course it's so much more convenient for the couple because see that would be a problem to sit in chairs looking at each other. Many of my couples are in two different places, not because they won't be in the same room, but because one's at one work and one's at another, and it's just more convenient that way.
Right,
So
right.
yeah, and but do you know what's telehealth is? This has actually come up. Telehealth is interesting because unlike when you're actually in a room with someone,
Right, right.
you can see all the faces on the screen at once.
Yeah.
And I'm not trying to hide who
Yeah,
I'm looking at, but
yeah, yeah,
I
yeah,
can
yeah.
glance at everybody much
Yeah,
more
much
quickly than
more.
I can when I'm attending to one person in an office and then the other.
Mhm.
It's subtly different. And
Right.
so it's there's
Very.
maybe some advantage there or some disadvantage, some combination or something.
I find it very, I don't, Judy, you also do the telehealth?
No, I'm not a therapist. I'm
Oh,
a retired Jewish educator.
oh, that's amazing. Okay.
Yeah,
I,
yeah,
I,
we like to
I
say
have to say,
I'm the therapist and Judy's the real person. That's how we often say it.
I was going to say the what I find so one of the many things that I find very fascinating is that I can notice what's going on around them. For instance, I've had dogs, right,
Hmm.
Mhm.
coming in and they get
Oh yeah.
distracted, or hoarding behind them, or
Hmm.
children knocking on the door, disrupting them, and that then can bring us to some conversation.
Hmm. Oh,
And
absolutely. Yeah. Yeah,
I
it
find
is to be
that
invited into their home is it's a very different thing
it's very
than,
different.
to have people in an office.
Yeah,
So how can people get in touch with you and,
sure.
excuse me, get your book and learn more about you?
Sure. So I think the easiest way would be to go to counselorforcouples.com.
Hmm.
And other than counselorforcouples.com, my book is on Amazon, the Why Won't You Stop Interrupting Me? Simple Solutions for ADHD Couples. And, certainly on LinkedIn and Facebook and Instagram, with all different,
Usual suspects. Yes,
yeah,
right.
so all kind of places. I'm certainly happy to give you links. I don't know if that is something you put people.
Well, yeah, I already have your link, a couple,
Okay,
what did it say,
perfect. Counselor for
counselorforcouples.com.
couples.
Yeah,
Mhm.
and we'll put that in the notes for this episode so people
Okay,
could
great.
just click on it. Yeah.
Yeah, that's the easiest way. Is just send me an email, who answers phones nowadays?
I know it's funny. I was remembering those days when people would make
Yeah,
appointments by phone. I don't think I've made an appointment by phone in the last 5 years,
Yeah.
but it's
Yeah,
kind of
but now
amazing. Yeah.
everybody's saying text me. Nobody's emailing me
I
anymore.
know, I
Even
know.
yeah,
I
like my daughter's like,
I'm an old guy,
you
so
may text me.
I still set up everything by email. People manage to adapt somehow, so they know I'm an old guy. That's what that's what that's
yeah.
about.
Me too, me
Well,
too. Yeah.
thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you. Thank you both so much. It's
Oh,
been a
thank you
delight.
so
Thank
much.
you. Very much appreciate it.
Welcome back. We hope you enjoyed that interview with Lisa. And if you have ADHD, check out Why Won't You Stop Interrupting Me? Simple Solutions for ADHD
Easy
couples.
for you to say, right?
No, no, not really.
Yeah. Indeed, yes, do that, and also, of course, if you have any ideas for us or you'd like to be interviewed yourself,
Mhm.
gee, Judy, what should people do?
You can go to our website, ctin7.com. That's CTIN, the number 7.com.
Yes, indeed. And when you go there, you will see there's a couple of different places where you can click on, send us a message and tell us what you'd like to do. And there's even a place where if you'd like to schedule yourself to be a guest, there's a place where it'll go to our scheduling link. It'll only offer you Fridays, but if you really need a different day, just drop us an email and we can probably accommodate you. Of course, we'll ask you, gee, what do you want to be interviewed about? What makes you think you'll be a good guest? And you know what? If you think you'd be a good guest, I'll bet you probably would be.
Right, because if you're listening to this podcast, you know that we deal with couples problems. So if you're listening, I'm sure that you probably have your own story.
Absolutely. And so until next time,
remember, be kind,
don't panic,
and have faith.